You were right. You had the data, you had the logic. And somehow, you still lost the argument. Not because they proved you wrong, but because they simply refused to be wrong. They deflected, they reframed, they changed the subject. They went quiet, and then came back 3 days later, acting like the conversation never happened. And now the wrong decision is moving forward, with your name attached to it, while the person who made the mistake is walking around the office like nothing happened. This isn't just frustrating, it's psychologically destabilizing, because your brain is wired to expect a basic social contract at work. That truth matters, that evidence counts, that if you're right, eventually the right thing wins. But some people in your office have completely opted out of that contract, and they're not losing for it. They're thriving. That's what we're going to unpack today. The psychology of people who never admit they're wrong, what drives them, how they operate, and most importantly, what you need to do to stop being the person who absorbs all the damage when they refuse to. Here's the first thing you need to understand, and it's going to reframe everything. When someone refuses to admit they're wrong, most people assume it's about ego, stubbornness, insecurity. And sometimes it is, but in a corporate context, it's almost always something more calculated than that. It's about power maintenance. In most organizational hierarchies, admitting you're wrong is not just acknowledging a mistake, it is a status transaction. You are publicly transferring social authority to the person who was right. And for people who have built their entire professional identity around being the authority in the room, that transaction is existentially threatening. So they don't make it. Ever. And here's the part that nobody talks about. The system often rewards them for it. Confidence, even misplaced confidence, reads as competence. Certainty, even wrong certainty, reads as leadership. The person who says, "I hear your concern, but we're moving forward," sounds decisive. The person who says, "Actually, I think you might be right," sounds weak, even when being right about being wrong is the most intelligent thing in the room. This is the game, and it's rigged in favor of people who never fold. Let's make this real. Picture this. You're in a project debrief. The campaign underperformed. The numbers are on the screen for everyone to see, and everyone in that room knows whose call it was. The decision that drove the strategy came from your manager. But instead of acknowledging it, they do something subtle and devastating. They start talking about execution challenges, about market conditions, about the team's alignment issues. They don't lie outright. They just create a fog of distributed blame so thick that by the end of the meeting, the failure belongs to everyone, which means it belongs to no one, which means it belongs to you. You watched it happen in real time. You felt the weight of the blame shifting. And you said nothing because you didn't have the language for what was happening fast enough to stop it. What you just witnessed has a name in psychology. It's called DARVO: deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. It's a defense mechanism used by people who cannot afford, psychologically or politically, to be in the wrong. First, they deny the problem as theirs. Then, they subtly attack the framing of the question. Then, they position themselves as the ones who are suffering from unrealistic expectations, from unsupportive teams, from impossible circumstances. And by the time it's done, the person who caused the problem is somehow the victim of it. And here's what makes it so effective. It's fast, it happens in minutes. And your brain, your rational, evidence-based brain, cannot process and counter it in real time because you weren't expecting it. You came to the meeting in good faith, they came prepared to never lose. But here's where it gets more complicated, because not everyone who refuses to admit they're wrong is doing it consciously. Some of them genuinely don't see it, and that's almost scarier. There's a psychological phenomenon called motivated reasoning. It means the brain works backward from a conclusion it wants to be true and then finds evidence to support it. For people with fragile professional identities, being wrong isn't just uncomfortable. It is genuinely threatening to how they understand themselves. So their brain, without any conscious instruction, filters out the evidence that they made a mistake, reinterprets it, reframes it, and they walk away from the wreckage of their own decision, genuinely believing they made the best call possible with the information available. You can't argue someone out of a position they reason themselves into emotionally. That's not stubbornness. That's a cognitive defense system running at full capacity. And here's the hidden rule this creates in your workplace. If you rely on logic alone to correct these people, you will lose every single time. Not because logic doesn't work, but because they are not operating in a logical framework. They are operating in a survival framework. And in survival mode, humans don't respond to evidence. They respond to threat assessment. So the question becomes, how do you make being wrong feel less threatening than continuing to be wrong? Now let's talk about the version of this that's closest to home for a lot of people. The manager who never admits they're wrong. This is uniquely damaging because the power dynamic removes your ability to correct them openly without consequence. You can't just present counter-evidence in a meeting without risking being labeled difficult, aggressive, or not a team player. You can't go above them without triggering a professional relationship that will quietly punish you for months. You are essentially living under a version of reality that has been constructed to protect someone else's ego, and you have to navigate it carefully, or you get crushed. Here's the scenario. Your manager pushed a process change you warned them about. You put your concerns in writing. You were careful. You were professional. You documented it. The process failed exactly the way you said it would. Now they're in your one-on-one, and instead of acknowledging that you are right, they say something like, "We need to make sure this kind of miscommunication doesn't happen again." Miscommunication. Not mistake, miscommunication, which subtly implies that the problem was information flow, not decision-making. That the problem was shared, that you are partially responsible. What do you say to that? Most people say nothing, or they agree. Because disagreeing with a manager in a one-on-one about their accountability feels like handing them a weapon. And the manager knows this. Maybe not consciously, but they know it. So here's what you actually do, because strategy matters here more than emotion. The first move is to stop seeking acknowledgement and start seeking documentation. I know that sounds cold, but in an environment where someone refuses to own their mistakes, your goal cannot be to make them say the words, "I was wrong." It won't happen, and chasing it will make you look obsessive and difficult. Instead, your goal is to create a clear, time-stamped record of your position. Emails, meeting notes, project updates. Not in an aggressive, cover-your-back way. In a professional, this is where I stand way. Following up on our conversation, I want to make sure I've captured our direction accurately. Please let me know if I've missed anything. Gentle, professional, irrefutable. The second move is to master what's called the neutral reframe. When a mistake happens and the blame fog starts rolling in, you do not fight it directly. You anchor to facts without accusation. Not, "That was your decision and it failed," but, "Based on the outcome, it looks like the original approach needs revisiting. I have some thoughts on what we could adjust." You are not letting them off the hook. You are moving the conversation forward on your terms, with your analysis front and center, without triggering their defense system. The third move, and this is the one that takes the most discipline, is to stop emotionally investing in whether they ever acknowledge the truth. Because here is the brutal reality. Some people will never say, "You were right." Not to you, not in public, not ever. And waiting for that moment is like waiting for a locked door to open from the inside. It keeps you stuck. It keeps you focused on them. And while you're focused on them, your own career is standing still. Redirect that energy. Be visibly right, consistently, over time. Build the kind of track record that speaks without you having to say a word. Because in the long game, repeated accuracy is more powerful than a single vindication. Now, here's the uncomfortable mirror, because this video would be dishonest if it didn't include this. Some of you watching have, at some point, been this person. Not maliciously, but you've held a position past its expiration date because letting go of it felt like losing. You've reframed a failure as a learning opportunity so quickly that you skipped the part where you actually sat with being wrong. And that's human. That's incredibly human. The difference is whether you do it once and adjust, or whether it becomes the permanent operating mode. The people who never admit they're wrong aren't monsters. They are people for whom being wrong became, at some point in their lives, genuinely dangerous. And they built an entire psychological fortress around never experiencing that again. The tragedy is that the fortress keeps everyone else out, including the information they need to actually get better. You're going to keep encountering these people in every job, in every industry, at every level. The ones who reshape reality faster than you can document it. The ones who turn your correctness into a threat. The ones who walk away from every wreck they caused, looking somehow unbothered. You won't change them. You won't fix them. You won't get the apology. But you can stop being the one who absorbs what they refuse to carry. The question is whether you're willing to learn the game fast enough before their next mistake has your name on it.